Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Gaming the System, the Feminist Gaming Podcast. Tonight we are Alex, Jem, and Matt, and we're going to be talking about the relationship between gaming and sex work. In thinking up to this and planning about it, we want to recognise that sex work in society is a very taboo topic. There's a lot of shame related to it, assigned to it, especially women's role in it. And we wanted to start off just by saying, well, me personally, I don't know anyone who does sex work, and I don't do it myself, but I don't pass any judgment on anyone doing it, and I'm sure that that's what our position is here, to just talk about things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Much like Matt, I also have never done any sex work, but I respect and hope to advocate for people doing sex work in a positive way. If I'm allowed to say that, I'm sure it's probably not allowed in some people's heads, but I do know of someone who is or was a sex worker, and have collaborated with them on a project about selfies and women's selfies and exploring that and how they're kind of judged through the lens of the patriarchy and that sort of thing. So in that way, I've sort of dipped a small toe into that sort of world, but I'm by no means an expert in it whatsoever, and but no, generally supportive of sex workers and helping them stay safe and positive and that sort of thing, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've never engaged in sex work, and I don't know anyone who has, as far as I'm aware. But I think that the main aim of society should be to have a positively consenting world when it comes to sex, and I think it's just, for me, the priority is about the safety of everyone involved in any of these areas, and I think that's what we should be working towards as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really good place to start. Of us, yeah. So everyone listening and watching, that's the position we're starting from, and we just want to get it out of the open and have an interesting conversation about it. So what is sex work, to start off with? A society called the Open Society Foundation, which works to build vibrant and inclusive democracies whose governments are accountable to their citizens. That's what their goal is. They define sex work as sex workers are adults who receive money or goods in exchange for consensual sexual services or erotic performances, either regularly or occasionally. And I think that's quite a good general overview of what we think about when we're talking about it. I've got some fun stuff about the history of porn, but since that's mainly OnlyFans related, we'll start off with how sex work is portrayed actually in games. So the first question is basically, what do you guys see as the relationship between gaming and sex work?
Who wants to go first? Oh.
Did you say something then, Jem?
I'm muted.
Yeah.
Start. Well, I mean, I think that sex work. Well, no, I think that games have. We've talked so much about them mirroring and influencing society. It's like a sort of two-way thing for me in the games world, like any media, actually, that it both represents society and shapes our society. So I think, how sex and sex work is portrayed within games is important, has a big influence on how is it also, especially given that games, even with their sort of like 18 age rating and stuff, are often consumed by younger audiences. I think there's quite um it's quite important that how these things are portrayed is something that is given great consideration. As far as sort of sex work goes in games, I don't think that I play a lot of games that have that kind of um, edge to them, because I don't really like gritty real world kind of games. I like to step away from reality. That's not to say that I haven't played any games that have those characters, and I think when they are portrayed, much like in mainstream media and movies and TV series, they're usually quite cliche. It's quite tropey. It's quite cliche, and I think probably, just thinking about it now, actually, that has a lot to do with your introduction, Matt, and about how divisive and controversial a topic it is, and how many people are not necessarily 100% sure about where they sit with the issue, and don't necessarily quite know how to feel about it and how to manage it. And I think that flows over into our media portrayals, because I think there's a balance between wanting something to be realistic, but what is realism, and wanting to be saying the right thing about it, whatever your genre or wherever you're coming from. So I think there's a sort of conflict that can go on there, that ends up with people just taking the easy option and going for something tropey. So yeah, that's my thoughts on on it.
I was thinking about how many games I've played which incorporate sex work in them, and the obvious one that came to mind, I haven't obviously finished it, but GTA 5 is the one that springs to mind immediately, of having, you can go to a strip club and pay for someone to lap dance for you. And I felt uncomfortable with it. I did it because, I wanted to see what it was like and how it was portrayed, because we are all naturally curious people. And also, I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, because obviously it was deemed particularly controversial, and one of the aspects of the game that was, that contributed to its controversy and its sort of taboo nature, and it felt very voyeuristic and uncomfortable, and I didn't like it. And those are my overriding memories, really. And I felt, well, there's lots of words people throw around, but it did feel almost sort of shameful and kind of, sort of pathetic almost. Like, why was I even, why was my character doing this? Like, why does it need to happen? And it stirred up all these feelings in me. And like Jem mentioned, it's difficult to really pin down exactly how you're supposed to feel and whether it's okay to feel the way that you feel about it. And I think that's definitely something that came up while I was playing that. And on the other side of the spectrum completely, the only other example I could think of while I was trying to figure out what other games I might have played that involve that, at least in terms of just sex being portrayed in games, are things like The Sims.
Yeah,
Where the word sex isn't used, it's the word woo woo. Is it woo woo? I think it's, well, woohoo is
yeah,
used
woohoo.
instead, and the camera politely shifts away and that kind of thing, and it's implied what happens, and but you don't see any of it. Like a lot of games, I think I've seen videos of things where there's like sex happening, but they're wearing clothes, which is a bit odd. And then obviously the other example I can think of, I never played the original God of Wars, but I think there was a mini game in it where you could have sex with concubines, and it focused on a jug on the table and it moved while the sex was happening. Just things like that, really, where it's either sort of accentuated and almost a caricature of what sex is to kind of avoid the awkwardness, or it's like really overt and on the nose. So there's no in between, really. At least that's what I can think of in my own experience of gaming. But it'd be interesting to see if anyone else has played anything else where it's come up at all.
Yeah, so because as to the question of if you think about why sex workers are being put in these games and why are they portrayed the way they are, because the games are made by men for men for most of time, they're making things that their 15-year-old self would want to see. And it's just this fantasy, but it's also making a joke out of the women that, yes, they are attractive. Yes, it's sexual stuff. And as I'll explain later about the history of porn over the last century, there is no limit to the amount of sexual weirdness that men will whatever to. I can't find the words for it, but it's like you said, it's like a parody. You just go, oh, these two concubines, we're going to have a sex game because it's a joke. And you can have lap dances, and Trevor in GTA 5 chases two topless women out of. So every time you swap characters, it goes up in the sky and then comes back down. And Trevor's sometimes he wakes up naked on top of a mountain or in a skip, and one of them he's chasing strippers about. But at every turn, I until very, very recently, with all the OnlyFans stuff and the such mainstreaming of porn industry, thinking about the reality of sex work, as with everything else patriarchy related, men in particular have been sold the fantasy images and characters of women that we see on screen in games and TV. And coming to terms with, we need to learn about the reality of these things and why these portrayals have a negative impact on the mainly women who do sex work.
Thank you for saying mainly women, Matt. It's also men as well, and other non-gender specific people.
Yeah, I found there's a collective in the UK called the English Collective of Prostitutes, and they have an excellent website, part of which is a list of facts about sex workers in the UK. And there are approximately 73,000 sex workers in the UK, and 88% of women are women. And see if you can. This is where it isn't. We think of the world as, particularly men, we're told that the world is a neutral place, equal playing field. But see how these list of elements about sex workers and how they apply to roles that are mainly done by women across society. Because sex work is treated like it's this taboo, shameful thing. If you think it's just work, it's just a job, it's just labour, think about it in terms of the other one. Most sex workers are mothers working to support families. They're not doing it for fun.
Mm.
They're doing it to make money. Maybe if they do enjoy it, that's good. But if it's making money to support families, and in 2004, government reports said that 74% of off-street sex workers, so that's things like chat sites and cam sites, did it to pay household expenses and support children, and that 70 more than 70% of UK sex workers have worked in healthcare, education, voluntary sector. So it really, to cut the propaganda aside and go and think of it as just another job, it's just another place where women are overrepresented, and they're compelled there not just because of agency.
Mm.
And yeah, and it's the portrayals in games and in other media, especially games, I think, don't
They don't factor
do any
that in.
service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's quite interesting because one of the articles that I read prepping for today was saying about how one of the problems with gay in-game sex workers is that they will often offer their services for free or a discount to the player character, because they're oh, you're so smart, or you're so sexy, or whatever. There's a sort of thing that's aiming at the gamer, at the player, to say, for you, I'll do this special deal. And I think, that is devaluing them further, isn't it? I mean, it's taking somebody that you're using in a game for the players, for fan service. I don't know if I came across the term fan service a few years ago when my daughter got into anime, actually. And I was quite shocked about the whole concept of fan service, because I just hadn't got my head around that before. But yeah, fan service being, like adding in sexy things to titillate your audience, and obviously that can vary quite dramatically in how it happens. So if you say that these sex worker characters, are not necessarily there to enhance the storyline, but are there to act as fan service for the gamers, then that's even more damaging. If then on top of that you're not even paying them a fair wage. So I think it is problematic, because it feeds into this idea that you were alluding to, I think, Matt, about how the idea is that sex workers do these jobs either for fun or because they're coerced into it. That there's these two extremes, and the reality is that, like any job, some people just do it because it happens to be the thing that works for them, and works around their lives. And that's neither glamorous or exciting or interesting. It just is. And I think, like, if we're always presenting these characters in games as a way to service the gamers, then it's like a double layer of abuse and discrimination really going on for these characters, virtual though they may be.
It really, thinking about, I can't remember where I read it from, but it's such a good point of sex work is just that. It's work. It's labor. It's like washing someone's car or being a chauffeur or being a chef. You think about it as just in terms of labor. And you think about what other characters there are in games. There are murderers, there are thieves, there are definitely war criminals, torturers. There is no kind of character that can't be portrayed in some way that is good and interesting and entertaining. Do either of you know of any instances where it feels like a genuine person portraying a sex worker rather than a joke for fan service?
Not in a game. No, I think only. Well, there's that that Ricky Gervais program TV show, Afterlife. The character in there, I forget the character's name, but the actor Roisin somebody, I think, the comedian. She's blonde. I'm terrible with names this evening. But anyway, her portrayal of a sex worker is just as this normal woman who's doing it to get money in and food on the table, that kind of thing. And she's immediately portrayed as this real human woman with a life, like beyond that job or beyond that idea of her of a person, as a person. And it's I think it's well done, or at least I hope so. I mean, obviously the show's it's a dark comedy because it's about death and like getting over the grieving process or going through the grieving process and that sort of thing. I don't know if either of you have watched it, but that's one example I can think of, and it's not a game.
I think it just goes to show how rare, if ever, it's been done well. You got any examples, Jem?
No, and I've just looked at always be careful what you put in the internet. I've just done a search for games with sex workers in, and I got a list from a website called Giant Bomb. I know nothing about them, but I can say that at the top of the games list, they have a picture of a young, healthy-looking, attractive woman, or at least presenting as female, with a cropped top and we've lost Matt.
You'll come back.
Just carry on. A crop top and a mini skirt, and she's provocatively licking a lolly.
Yes.
And I think it's not. This is a list of games that have this in, so there's no need for an image like that.
Well, I just thought of one actually. Assassin's Creed 2 has the House of Prostitutes and the lady who manages them, but then it is set in Renaissance Italy, so I guess if they were representing the time, it wouldn't have been that progressive.
No, I mean, I can think of games with them because the list here is like Grand Theft Auto, Assassin's Creed, The Witcher, Battlefield Hardline, and various others. And I think, I haven't played any of those in enough depth to be able to say how they're portrayed, but I'm guessing the fact that it, like you said, Matt, it's clearly a rare thing for them to be anything other than, eye candy or, women in the background.
And weirdly enough, in Assassin's Creed, you use a lot of, well, you can use the prostitutes as a tool to blend in crowds or to distract guards, but literally that's all they are, is a tool to allow you to progress through the game.
I just had a bit of difficulty, so I'm going to end the recording just to double check that the last few minutes are recorded.